on Q90 FM. You can go to standupforthetruth.com and the show link will be posted. I will post it on my Facebook page when it's available. I apologize for not doing any midweek earlier this week. I was doing prep and reading for that podcast. I also have a conference I'm going to be doing in Calgary, Canada, May 5th and 6th. With Carl Kirby and a couple other guys whose names I don't remember off the top of my head. If you want to find out information about that, you can go to ldbc.ca. LDBC, that's for Last Days Bible Conference.ca. ldbca.ca, and you can get I think they have the schedule there, and I don't know if they're requiring registration or not, but you can do that. And I've been doing prep. I have 4 talks I'm going to be giving there. The theme of the conference is that, God is unchanging, taking the verse out of Psalm 90. And so we're trying to kind of keep it on that theme. Also, June 16 to 18, I'll be doing a conference with Moriel.org in, I think it's called Swarthmore House or something in Scotland, northern Scotland. So if you want to go to that, there's a registration. I think that's a residential conference where you come and stay at a Christian retreat center. And I'll also be doing, I think the Sunday before that, I'll be in the Yorkshire area. I'll post information about that as we get closer down in England. So if you want to do that, that's a place you can get me in. So I've been engaged in a lot of prep, and I'm redoing a presentation on the Temple Mount and some things that my research indicates, and getting graphics and everything together. So that's why I haven't been as diligent about doing a midweek update. And I'm just trying to read and keep up with a lot of things. The world is very crazy. So I'm going to touch on a couple of issues. I'll take a few questions. If you want to put questions in all caps, that would be great. And I'll try to get to those. It's hard when I'm, just so you know, I'm monitoring, make sure my video is right, my green screen is right, my lighting's right, my audio is correct, and that sort of thing. So it's hard to keep up. So there's been a couple recent developments that I think we need to talk about, and they mainly relate to the Middle East and Israel. Although let me share this, because I think this is pretty significant. At some point, it seems that the financial system is going to be in a pretty bad state. So here's a story about SVB, which is hang on a second here. Here we go. SVB is called Silicon Valley Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank funds a lot of tech companies. And as you know, the tech sector has been in a bit of a state of meltdown. And what happened to SVB is the banks have certain working capital requirements. In other words, they have to have cash on hand to meet. They have certain ratios, and they got out of whack. And so what they have to do then is they have to sell off assets. So they sold off, I think the numbers are a couple $2 billion of assets. And then they were going to go into the market and sell stock to try to raise more working capital. But then today, that completely fell through. That had a follow-on effect on other banks, so that I think the 5 major banks in the United States yesterday in the market lost $52 billion in market capitalization. That's a pretty big deal, and the market was down as a result. And at some point, I think there's something that's going to trigger the financial system to go into a pretty serious decline. Part of me is, there's a little bit of optimism at the backside, but if we get into a war, actual declared war with Russia or China, I think that's that's going to happen. So this is a very big deal. There's also an article today in the Wall Street Journal about what to make of the Asbury revival. It says here it may produce some good, but such events can also be a vehicle for virtue signaling. And I think that would sort of go along with some of the things that I've seen. And I've expressed my concerns and take a wait and see attitude on this and whether it spreads. You know, we talk about the Jesus movement of the 70s, which I think really was a good revival, a true revival, but it's really looking back that we can see that this happens. So I think we need to be cautious in pronouncing that this is the greatest thing ever. So that's just my concern on that, and let people be concerned about it. And you know, I know there are people who are entirely enthusiastic, but I see what this article talks about. This is an article in the Wall Street Journal today by D.G. Hart. I'm not sure who D.G. Hart is. Let's see. Teaches history at Hillsdale College. So I think he's a solid, you know, he's a solid thinker. He's at Hillsdale. But I see that there's a lot of virtue signaling that if you're not fully on board, you're a problem and you're quenching the spirit and that sort of thing. And I think those kind of charges are a bit ridiculous. So so we have the financial situation with SVB. As I said, they went down. I think you can see from this particular chart that their shares have fallen. 81 chart should come up here, and there it is. Chart there, they've halted trading, but since Wednesday, their shares went down 81%. And as I said, that sort of had a follow-on effect that there was $52 billion market cap loss by the major banks in one day, by the 5 major banks in the U.S., which is pretty significant. And then everybody starts heading for the hills, and everything that's happening, I think, is very volatile in the financial situation, the financial realm. That is going to be a problem. So this I think is a significant story. So let's talk about the Middle East a little bit. First of all, Russia's putting a lot of missiles into Ukraine right now. And I think this has an impact on things in the Middle East and things that may lead to eventual prophetic events like Ezekiel 38 and 39 and maybe Isaiah 17 and that sort of thing. So everybody's talking about war. I would not. I get a lot of email that, you know, Russia's going to nuke the United States with nuclear weapons. And I don't know. Here's a report, though. This is from Daily Sabah, which is a Turkish newspaper. Russian missiles rain down in Ukraine. You can see from the subheadline there, it says this. The nuclear power plant currently occupied by Russian forces. It's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and it's lost power again. So there are certain things to keep the nuclear power plant in operation that require electricity. The plant electricity generation it doesn't have power to the plant. So they have diesel generators that provide backup generators to keep the plant cooled down. If the plant's not cooling down, then there's a chance of a Chernobyl type event, which, by the way, a lot of people don't remember. Chernobyl happened in Ukraine, in the northern part of Ukraine. And that happened, what did that happen? 40 years ago. And it's still a problem. So the impact on the Middle East, I think, which is where a lot of Bible prophecy is centered, though, is that Russia's getting arms, weapons from Iran. Iran is about 10 to 12 days away from having enough uranium to build a nuclear weapon. Of course, you get the nuclear material together, then you have to get it into a bomb or a missile. You have to sort of miniaturize it to get it onto a payload, a thing that can deliver a payload, and then you need the missile. But at the same time that this is going on with everything in Ukraine, Iran providing weapons to Russia, Russia relying on Iran to a large extent. Israel then launches an attack on the Ukrainian facility that's manufacturing drones. Then Russia gets upset with Israel for doing that because Russia wants those drones. Then on the other side of this, you have the things going on in Syria, Iran putting things into Syria to manufacture missiles and drones and that sort of thing that will eventually be used by Hezbollah and Iran and others to attack Israel. Israel this week also bombed the airport in Aleppo, and that caused a lot of outrage because, as you know, there was the major earthquake in Syria and Turkey about a month ago that's caused massive devastation. I think the death toll is probably up around 60,000 now, the confirmed death toll. It may still go higher as they dig out all of this rubble. I think I saw that there's enough rubble generated from this earthquake alone that it could cover, and I forget the depth. It's the depth of a number of meters of Manhattan Island, which is 2 miles wide and 12 miles long. So it's a big mess, and there's a lot of people still trapped under there, obviously dead at this point. I doubt it'd be a miracle if anybody survived anymore. It's going to cost massive amount to rebuild. And a lot of the supplies have been coming in through the Aleppo airport. Aleppo has been the largest city in Syria, and Israel attacked the airport and essentially shut it down. Of course, now everybody's saying Israel doesn't care. They're trying to kill everybody because they're doing this. But part of the problem is the Iranians have been coming in and using the earthquake relief as cover to bring in weapons in support for building of weapons that will be used against Israel. So Israel sort of has this dance that they do. I don't think Russia's always been sort of historically hostile or a lot of tension with Iran. So they use Iran when it's to their benefit. So Russia, I think, doesn't mind sometimes that Israel attacks Iran and Syria because it helps keep Syria in check. But back to the supplying of weapons by Iran to Russia to use in Ukraine. So you can kind of get a picture of the end times organization by who's working together against Ukraine. Again, this is not to say that we support everything that Ukraine does and everything. I have some friends in Ukraine that I've been in contact with, and they have a much different view than a lot of the pro-Russian information that you get in conservative media here in the United States. So I think everybody needs to just kind of take everything with a grain of salt. For example, I was sent something the other day by a guy in Ukraine, very pro-Russian, hates the Ukrainian government. And so I started digging through his, I think it was his Twitter page, and it was about 3 tweets down that he was tweeting, I think, a video of Nick Fuentes, who is a Jew-hating guy here in the United States. And so you get this Jew hatred that seems to ramp up in this situation. In fact, I also, through a couple connections, I suddenly was onto a video where somebody was saying, well, let's get Ukraine destroyed so it can be rebuilt so the Jews can go back to where they came from. Get them out of Israel and go back to where they came from. And so you're seeing just this convergence of all of these wars, rumors of wars, and rising anti-Semitism. I just saw an article as I was getting on here that in the UK they've accused CAMERA, that's the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, a good organization that tracks anti-Semitism, of being white supremacist. So everything is at a very heightened state. So let's go back to Iran making drones and other weapons for Russia to use in Ukraine. Part of that agreement, as they meet, I think China, Iran, and Russian foreign ministers are meeting in Russia right now, or will be soon. There is a lot of concern, and I think some good intel that says that Russia is also working to help Iran on its nuclear weapons, uranium enrichment, and weapons development. Now, they may do that under the cover of we're just helping them to build reactors so they can have better medical diagnostics. I don't believe that for a minute. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. At the same time that that's going on, there is a bit of a meltdown in Israel over the judicial reform. So the question right now is, what is Israel going to do about Iran having a nuclear weapon? Are they going to attack? Most analysts say Israel has to attack. Israel has said we want the United States to help us. So what happens if we join in an attack on Iran, and then Russia gets upset with that because that's affecting their military campaign in Ukraine? What are they going to do? I played you the clip last week of Alexander Dugin, often referred to as Putin's brain. And Dugin said, if we start losing in Ukraine, we'll go nuclear. Now, we will never use nuclear weapons, but we'll use them if we start losing. And so I think that most people who look at this say this is a very dangerous situation, a very tense situation geopolitically. As I've sort of analyzed Ukraine, I've seen these videos that they put out about Ukraine 2030. There's a book that's out. You can get it. This was a book published back in 2018. Let's see if I can pull that thing up. Here we go. Give me 1 second here. Let me get this over on my screen. Okay, so here's a book that you can go and find, and it's called Ukraine 2030, The Doctrine of Sustainable Development. And if you look in here, you will find that this was published in in 2013 or 2018. I'm sorry. Let's see down here. There we go. Let me blow that up a little bit just so you can see. So you can see that this was published in Ukraine in 2018. And then I've played this video. There's a video out there you can find on Twitter, Ukraine 2030. I played it in one of my presentations. My thinking is that what they want to do with Ukraine is they don't care if Ukraine is destroyed because they plan on building a utopian society to replace it. And so in this video, it talks about Ukraine was the first one to go cashless. Ukraine was the first one to do digital identity for everybody. So I'm not so sure that the end game isn't to get Ukraine destroyed so we can build sort of use them as a lab to build this great society using all the World Economic Forum agenda items. I'm not so sure. So so I'm going to answer one question here on Ukraine. It says, can you clarify? Let's see if I can pull this question up. Can you clarify your thoughts on Zelenskyy acts towards Christian Ukraine? Is Zelenskyy anti-Christian or not? If not, what would you think make you think he is not anti-Christian? So I have spent a lot of time, many hours, talking to a pastor friend in Ukraine. He has a very different perspective on this. And so you will see a narrative from, say, Tucker Carlson that Zelenskyy and others that Zelenskyy is totally anti-Christian because he's put restrictions on the Orthodox Church. The problem with that is that I know evangelical people that work in Ukraine, have worked in Ukraine, and even after Zelenskyy took over a few years ago with 80% of the vote, a lot of people don't want to mention that he replaced, it was either he or the guy just before him, or replaced a government that had really been installed by Russia. And that really upset Putin because he wanted parts of Ukraine and he wanted to control all of Ukraine. And then this regime was put in, and everybody says it was the CIA. And I'm pretty sure that the CIA helped, but also understand that people I've talked to in Ukraine were very happy when Zelenskyy came in. And I'm not saying Zelenskyy is a good guy or anything. I'm just saying is that people were not upset by that because they didn't like the Russian-based regime. So what has happened, the reason for the restrictions is not on evangelicalism or that type of thing. It's been put on the Orthodox Church because of the infiltration by Russian agents in the church and the use by Russia of that church as a weaponized war machine. So that I'm just telling you, this is what's reported to me by people in Ukraine that I trust. So I don't think that he's necessarily anti-Christian. Need to understand that Ukraine is in the midst of a war. And so I would expect the leader of Ukraine would try to find help from different places. I think one of the things that sort of bothered me about the coverage of this is that everybody wants to talk about Ukraine, but they never talk about the Russian atrocities that are occurring. So I just think we kind of need to see and wait and how this unfolds. But I'm very concerned about the relationship between Russia and Iran. And I think that, let me pull up while I'm talking here. So I'm not sure that I can never remember how to turn off these. There we go. Questions. There we go. So I want to pull up something from another website here. Find it. It's from Geopolitical Futures. It had a pretty good map. I don't see it off the top of my head. So there's this preparation. People are making preparations for an attack on Iran. There were reports this week that Israeli planes, jets, tankers, that type of thing had flown from Israel to Spain across the Mediterranean. Well, when you look at the distance from Israel to Spain is about the same distance as Israel to Tehran. And so it's pretty clear that what they're doing there is they're practicing. They're practicing these attacks. So here, let me see if this is the article that I wanted. Okay, maybe I can do this. So let's see if this has the map that I wanted. So Israel and Iran, and it's there's a lot of too that Israel and Iran aren't really in direct conflict, but they're definitely not getting along. Here we go. Okay, now it puts it up on the. Okay, so this is the area of conflict. This is a pretty good map. It's because it's simple. How is Israel? And so now you get into the question of the logistics. So let's say Israel decides to do something with Iran. They do have F-35 jets that they've modified, and they've modified the fuel tank system so that they can get to Iran without having to be refueled. And then the question becomes, where are they going? How are they going to attack Iran? To go from Israel to Iran is pretty difficult. So there have been some thinking that, well, they will use a base in Bahrain or Saudi Arabia to do that, maybe United Arab Emirates, but I just don't see those people being in a place to help Israel do an attack on Iran at this point. I don't think Israel will be inclined to act without the United States assistance. There seems to be some intelligence to indicate that Israel up here in Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea will have the ability to use bases in Azerbaijan to attack Iran, because there's a historical tension between Azerbaijan and Iran. And by the way, part of Khomeini, I think Khomeini's mother or father were from Azerbaijan, the head of the supreme leader in Iran right now. But there's a logistics issue because nobody has incredibly long-range bombers, particularly fighter jets. They have limited capacity, and you can get there, but you can't get them back. So a lot of people said, well, Israel will just use bases in Saudi Arabia. But then this thing came, and I think this is a pretty significant development. This was just published by the Wall Street Journal about a little over an hour, about an hour ago, 10:55 a.m. today. Saudi Arabia, Iran restore relations in deal brokered by China. Deal marks a diplomatic victory for Beijing in a region where the U.S. has long dominated geopolitics. This appears to be kind of I think I've not read the deal. Look at what the article says. Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to reestablish diplomatic relations Friday in a deal brokered by China, ending 7 years of estrangement and jolting the geopolitical alignment of the Middle East. The deal, which comes after other unsuccessful attempts by Iraq and others to mend fences, marks a diplomatic victory for Beijing in a region where the U.S. has long dominated geopolitics. Iran and Saudi Arabia are major suppliers of oil to China and have sought closer economic ties, but the agreement is the first time Beijing has weighed in so heavily on the region's rivalries. I mean, I think, unless I'm completely misreading this, this is a pretty big deal. And I'll probably be talking more. Here's some other information under the agreement released by all three countries. Iran and Saudi Arabia will reopen their embassies and missions on each other's soil within 2 months, and both affirm non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. The two countries agreed that their foreign ministers will hold a summit soon to hammer out the details. This is, I think, in terms of Israel, this is not good news. Now, there are also things underway. I think there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, here it is. This is an article in the Wall Street Journal today. So the article that I just showed you came out because it just happened this morning. Saudi seek edge in Israeli talks. Riyadh wants the U.S. to provide security guarantees and help build nuclear fuel program. So Saudi Arabia is coming to us asking for stuff. And down here, there's this paragraph here: striking a normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia has become a priority for President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu amid a looming confrontation with Iran over its nuclear program and military aid to Russia during the Ukraine war. The Biden administration is deeply involved in the complex negotiations that people said in any deal would reshape the Middle East political landscape. So, at least for now, and I know there's this belief out there that, the United States goes away completely and is not involved in end-time Bible prophecy at all. I'm not sure that I agree with that. I'm taking a wait and see approach on that. I understand where people are coming from. They're saying that, well, the United States is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. But I think you can make that argument about a lot of countries, but we'll see we'll see as things unfold. So I think we need to be flexible in our views on this. But so the Saudis the United States is working and they're trying to get this arrangement with Israel, normalization arrangement. At Davos, the Saudi foreign minister said, well, we got to get the Palestinian issue solved. I believe there have also been some efforts by Jordan to get the United States involved in this. And so there is this thing floating around in the background. It was just about a year ago that the Wall Street Journal came out with this thing called the Jordanian option. And in the Jordanian option, let's see if I can find that. So now I'm going to get all these articles on Michael Jordan. Who I'm pretty sure is not part of end-time Bible prophecy, by the way. Let's see if I can find this article. Well, let me look at this one first. This is the one I haven't gotten to yet. This is Walter Russell Mead. And he says, war in the Middle East is closer than you think. He's a Middle East historian, well-respected. But I will tell you that I saw an interview that he did with I guess it was Netanyahu. You should look it up on YouTube. And it was a bit troubling the way that the approach that he took, and sort of was like, well, Israel, we talk about this Bible prophecy and how it was reconstituted, but it was just people who wanted to do a good thing. It was a bit troubling the way that he characterized it. But I do agree with his article from an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on February 28th that this is war in the Middle East is closer than you think. So the question is, how's this war going to come about, and who's going to be involved, and what impact does it have, and how quickly will things happen? I don't have an answer for you, but I just know that things are incredibly tense. So let me go back. I'm droning on. You also need to know one other thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about this on Sunday. But there's incredible internal political tension in Israel right now. And I think most people would say, well, I don't know. I go to the office every day and I don't see it. But there are big protests. Yesterday there was a flotilla of Naval Reserve people from the Israeli Defense Force that blocked the port in Haifa at the cost of millions of dollars. And they're saying, this is an illegal government. This is a fascist government. This is an anti-democratic government, even though it was democratically elected. There was nothing said about irregularities in the way the election was conducted in Israel, but nobody on the left wants to accept the result. Yair Lapid has come out and said, I don't want to compromise on judicial reform. I want to bring the government down. Herzog, the president, which is it's a ceremonial office, but it does carry some weight. He came out and did a great speech a few weeks ago and said we need to compromise on this. But then he gave a speech yesterday that was very much against the current government. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, so I don't want to comment on it too much, because I don't want to be inaccurate in what I say. But I think it's there are a lot of moving pieces right now, and a lot of it centers around the war in Ukraine, the fallout from that. Russia's doing major attacks. They're sending a lot of people in. I heard that they were bringing in another 80,000 people. Discussion I had with somebody who I think knows what he's talking about said that I actually used to work in Russian analysis for a U.S. agency, and he meets with defense people. Ukraine's losing 800 soldiers a day in some of these attacks, and some of them are quite brutal. I saw a Ukrainian soldier who had surrendered, and they clipped the video just as Russians blew his head off. As he was surrendering, standing there smoking a cigarette, talking to them, they blew his head off. It's pretty brutal. Russia's probably losing, from what I can tell, more soldiers on a daily basis than Ukraine, but the percentage of the overall Russian force is much less than the percentage of the Ukrainian force that's being killed each day, killed or injured. And this is Russian military doctrine. They will just grind you down by sending in wave after wave after wave. That's how they fight wars, and what they do to the infrastructure in the country is they just completely obliterate it. And if you don't believe me, go look at what has happened since Russia got involved in Syria. The Sunni areas of Syria were bombed into rubble. Those Syrian people left. They became refugees. They went to Turkey. They've gone all over the world. Remember the crisis of the back in 2016, 2017, of the influx of Syrian refugees into Europe. And a lot of that still continues. And now with the earthquake that happened in Turkey, Syria, that's making that problem, again, more troublesome. There's probably well over 1 million people left homeless by that. And it's in the area where a lot of the Syrian refugees had gone. So it's just everywhere you look, there are major problems. So you have this judicial reform thing that's happening in Israel. Some people are questioning whether the Netanyahu government can continue. There are cases brought in the Supreme Court to shut Netanyahu down and get him removed from the government. And the way the Israeli Supreme Court has been interpreting the law that they've sort of made up is that they get to decide that. And people get to bring those cases. They're not dismissed on lack of standing or anything. The Attorney General in Israel has already ruled that Netanyahu cannot participate in discussions or negotiations over judicial reform. And that's coming from the judicial legal side of things. And so I think everybody agrees in Israel, at least at one point, has agreed that there needs to be some kind of judicial reform. The question is what that takes. But now they don't like the government. They don't like the Orthodox religious parties in the coalition with Netanyahu. And it's a very divided country. And in fact, in the article with that Melanie Phillips wrote today, let's see, where is this? Hang on a second, let me pull this up. Here it is. The urgent need for Israeli electoral reform. And look at what she says down here. And the one thing that I find interesting about this, just look at the last few paragraphs. She talks about the fact we have a problem in the United States. We have a problem, sort of a parallel problem in the UK. And so look at the last few paragraphs of this article. No less alarmingly, many young Brits, schooled in the belief that the Western nation state is itself illegitimate and racist, say they don't think anything was wrong with communism. In America, a similar belief that the nation is mired in original sin has fueled the rise among the young of identity politics ideologies, all of which are fundamentally anti-majoritarian. The U.S. also remains dangerously polarized between those who believe that the last presidential election was stolen from them, and those who believe former President Trump and his supporters tried to mount a coup against the democracy in the January 6th Capitol riot. And there have been some, I think, videos released, and go watch Tucker Carlson if you want to see those. I think that we've been fed a narrative in large part, but that's going to play out. And by the way, nobody's going to be prosecuted for lying about January 6th. No one's going to be prosecuted for lying about what happened with the Charlie Vector 019, or nobody's going to be prosecuted for weaponizing the social media platforms against conservatives. No one's going to be prosecuted for weaponizing the justice system against conservatives, because the conservatives have no power in the Department of Justice right now to do that. The only way that changes if there's an election, and even if there's an election that brings someone to power who would try to clean that up, it takes time to clean it up. So we are years away from seeing anything happen there. You will see information come out, and maybe that will persuade people to change their votes. I don't know. I think everybody's pretty polarized right now. But look at this. Israel's current convulsions, this is Melanie Phillips, are playing into enemies' hands. Iran is gloating, and as commentators Lee Smith and Michael Duran have noted in Tablet, the Biden administration is not so covertly aiding the efforts to bring Netanyahu down. In fact, the Biden regime is funding some of these protests against Netanyahu. In Israel, divisions have now been brought to a head which threaten to split the Jewish people. Those aware of the lesson of Jewish history, that such splits brought about the collapse of ancient Jewish commonwealths, are beside themselves with anxiety. It is scant comfort that Britain and America are facing a similar reckoning. So that's it. There's a parallel going on here, and the West is having a lot of problems. So I would also recommend, I think, General Amir Avivi, who I know from the IDSF, has expressed a lot of concerns with the infiltration of the military, people who aren't going to serve. I think that Caroline Glick in her show this week did interview Amir, and you should go look at that. They're trying to fight against this. There was also some, Sarah Netanyahu, the prime minister's wife, went to a hair salon, and they literally had to send security people in there to rescue her. It's a very tense situation. There's a lot of bad conduct that's going on. And I understand the concerns that people have about the ultra-Orthodox parties using this as a way to further their agenda, which a lot of people oppose. So everything's very volatile, but you understand that it comes in the context of this potential attack or the need that Israel may have to attack Iran. So I'm going to go to the comments here and see if there are any questions real quickly, because I've already gone way over what I promised I would do. Okay, I'm not seeing any all caps questions as I go through this. So I guess I would just say is that the details of this will come out in terms of this agreement that just was announced this morning. Supposedly something, the diplomatic arrangements between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And look, they're opposed politically, but the concern I've always had with Islam is they may have a common enemy at some point. But I don't know if this is going to be a complete game changer or not. I'm just saying is we need to look at this because it's a significant development in light of the fact that Israel may want to go against Iran, and they'll need overflight rights. So there were some things that were supposed to have been done with regard to further normalizing things between Saudi Arabia and Israel that haven't taken place yet. I talked, last year about the islands in the Straits of Tiran, Tiran, at the southern end of the Red Sea. Those where Egypt was supposed to give those islands back to Saudi Arabia, but the peace agreement between Egypt, which controlled those islands when the Yom Kippur War took place in 1973, and then in the agreement between Israel and Egypt, where Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula, Egypt had to agree that they would never allow those islands to be used as a method to blockade the southern port of Israel at Eilat. When things were going to try to normalize relationships between Israel and Saudi Arabia granted some overflight rights, the ability of Israeli aircraft to overfly Saudi Arabian territory. Those islands were supposed to be transferred back to Saudi control, but now there's tension between Egypt and Saudi Arabia on some issues, and that transfer has not taken place yet. So I think that needs to be done to get a full normalization of agreement relationships between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which I think is coming, but I think it's sort of complicated by this particular thing. So let me just check real here and see if I've got any particular questions. So here's a question. Is war pretty much foregone deal in your opinion? He served in, and thank you for your service in the Persian Gulf. Yeah, listen, the Bible prophesies wars and rumors of wars. And I think that there are certain wars that are maybe a precursor to the exact things prophesied in Scripture. And I think that's how some of those things come about. But I think it's very tense. The Ukrainian thing, the Iran-Israel, all of that is very tense. There was a report that was put out by CSIS, by the way, and I've been meaning to get to this for a number of weeks. Let me see if I've got this handy here. I get too many windows open, and even my computer slows down a bit. Now I'm not seeing it. There's a report that an organization called CSIS put out. CIS, it's the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It's a let's see if I can find it here. They did a report about a wargaming, the situation on Taiwan. Here it is, wargaming a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And so they went through a war game scenario. What happens if Taiwan invades China, or China invades Taiwan? And that's part of this mix too, on this wars and rumors of wars thing. And essentially what they said was that Israel, or not say Israel, the United States would lose a couple of aircraft carriers, hundreds of aircraft, but that ultimately they did not think that China would be successful. There's a report that they put out, the first battle of the next war, and you can go and find that at the CSIS. I bookmark a lot of these think tanks. You can see here that I use. There's another report that's out that I'll be talking about as I have time to read it. And again, these are reports that I don't necessarily agree with on all of their orientation. INSS, the Israeli Institute for National Security Studies, they just did a conference. You can go to the inss.org.il and you can watch these. There's also a strategic analysis that they just came out with for Israel among the world's democracies. And again, I've made reference to this, and it's it's about 100 pages long of the all these different aspects of what's going on. It talks about global warming, so it has a left-wing orientation. They talk about climate change and that type of thing. But they talk about Ukraine, they talk about Israel, the Palestinians, they talk about, here's on page 39 of the PDF, what's going on in the regional arena, and they talk about Israel's strategic gap and everything. So it's well worth downloading and reading, and I'll try to talk about it. I just haven't had time to wade through it. These think tanks are putting out these reports like you wouldn't believe. And they have all these conferences. So you have the INSS conference, you have the World Government Summit, you have Davos and that type of thing. And it's pretty difficult. I think that we in the Bible Prophecy community maybe need to set up our own think tank to kind of have a good analysis of these things, because I don't think any of us can keep up. So anyway, that is let me just double check on new. Hide that comment. So, let's see. Okay. Anyway, so look, I appreciate you listening, and there's some other comments I don't think I need to address right now. But here's a question. Okay, this is a good question. Thank you, Stephanie. Why can't Israel get a mid-air refueler? Israel does have some refueling tankers, and those would be necessary for a sustained campaign against Iran. The United States, part of the problem is right now is the United States is behind in re-upping its fleet, improving its fleet of refueling tankers. Israel's been promised tankers, but they're not going to get them till 2025 or 2027. So that has an impact on their decision to move forward here. Now, it's possible they could use some of our tankers, but then that means we're involved. And we're involved. That's going to upset Russia. That's going to upset Iran. And I personally think that there are some, we know in England, they've come out and said that there are Iranian cells tracking people, and that if anything happens, they're going to attack the Jews in the UK. I suspect that might also be a fear here in the United States. So when this happens, literally, I think all hell's going to break loose, and I do think that it's going to happen at some point. I disagree with the comment that says this can't happen until the restrainers are removed. We already have wars and rumors of wars, and this can happen whether the church is here or not. That's what we need to prepare ourselves for, mentally and physically. You need to do some prepping, spiritually and also physically. the Lord will provide, but the Lord also gives us common sense to act. And I think when we see these things, we should take reasonable action. And here's a comment about all the Western countries are divided and all are tired of crooked leaders. And I would say to that comment, yes, that's true. And there are people that are tired of crooked leaders in other countries like Iran, like Russia, and that type of thing, because there's a tremendous amount of corruption in government right now. So look, I'll talk more about this Sunday, hopefully with more graphics and slides, and I appreciate it. So God bless. We would like it if you would like, share, subscribe on our YouTube channel. It does help us with the social media algorithms and that type of thing. So appreciate it. Thanks so much for listening. And also go check out for my podcast on standupforthetruth.com with David Fiorazo that I recorded between 10 and 11 a.m. Eastern this morning. God bless.